how do you feel about the Patriots coaching staff? And basically what I mean by that is this was our first chance to kind of see Mike Vrabel and this staff run practice, go about the operation, things like that. For those who don't remember, this is how we started every pod, I think like 3 weeks into the regular season last year.
Oh, I was going to say, it started 3 weeks in, and then it went for the rest of the year.
It kind of became this running joke that ultimately became a very pressing question. But it feels like an appropriate time to pick that conversation up again.
Sure.
How do you feel about this Patriots coaching staff after watching them operate for about a month?
Well, it's certainly, an upgrade from last year, I would think. I would hope, right?
Feels like it.
Feels like it. Certainly defensively, not surprising. It's usually how it goes after minicamp, OTAs, before they even put the pads on, that the defense is ahead of the offense. But I would say it's less surprising considering we're talking about Mike Vrabel and Terrell Williams, a deep defensive coaching staff that seems like they have the talent and the scheme there. On the offensive side of the ball, it feels like the scheme is there. It feels like, when they run the team drills, it feels like there's a concept there. There's an idea behind what they're doing. Josh McDaniels feels like he has that part of it under control. But you wonder if they have the personnel to really pull it off. I think on defense, they do have the personnel to pull off what they're trying to accomplish. I feel like it feels like it's been a solid operation. It's looked a little bit different from what we're used to seeing, like the coaches wearing pennies out there and like positioning drills and things like that. We didn't really see Bill Belichick in a penny too often. It looks a little different. But for the most part, like an NFL camp, it's not going to look wildly different from what we're used to seeing. I think overall the operation feels like it's solid, and I think they're going to be solidly coached. Just going to come down to, do they have the players to pull it off?
So to that last point you just made, like it feels like an NFL camp, and I get asked, does it feel different down there? How does it feel down there? Does it feel different than last year? And it's like, yes and no. It certainly feels different than it did at the end of last year. Absolutely. From where we left it with Gerard Mayo to now, 180. But we also weren't necessarily feeling that worried. Maybe we should have been, but we weren't necessarily feeling that worried at this time last year because there's only so much you can tell from this time of the year. So when I look at it, like one big differentiator to me, you cover enough of these camps and you follow this enough and you sort of know, all right, you go from unpadded to padded and you're working on this. And then by this point, you should be working on that. And by this point, you should be working on that. And this was more of a summer thing than a spring thing last year. But I remember like they didn't get into red zone for a while. And it was to the point where like they should, like, why are they still running these same periods over and over? It feels like they should have moved on and they didn't. And that was one of the first major indicators for me, like, they might be behind schedule. They were behind schedule. Whereas this year, I mean, they were able to just hammer red zone the 2 days of minicamp because of the work they put on in OTAs. So just staying on schedule in terms of the install and things like that. And then just on a smaller level within the practices, I love the way they structured it in that, they do the individual drills at the beginning, right? Which every team does. But then it was, there'd be 3 periods and they'd go through the cycle 2 or 3 times a practice where offense running against air or maybe against the coaches in pennies, right? Just giving them a look. It'd be the offense against air in a walkthrough pace or the defense against air, right? In a walkthrough pace. Then it would be offense versus defense, but again, in that walkthrough pace. And then it would be the full speed rep offense versus defense. And it looked like they were running a lot of the same concepts between each 3. So it's okay. Here's what we want it to look like. Here's what we wanted to look like against the defense. Now let's run it. And by doing that, you clean things up in those walkthrough portions. So once you get going with it, right? Once you get humming, it's not as jerky, start, stop. We got to do this. We got to do that. They're just kind of able to run it. And all right, we tried to flush everything out when we were at the walkthrough pace. Now let's see how this looks. I really like that they were running practice that way.
Yeah, that is a striking difference, I would say, now that you really laid it out the way you just did, is that in Bill Belichick's time, and Gerard Mayo was pretty much a continuation of the Bill Belichick way because that's pretty much all he knew. He would gear up and gear down a lot. There would be a lot of, team period followed by some light individual periods, and then they'd gear back up and down. And they did the third down and red zone stuff. Yeah. But with Vrabel, it feels like there is more of a logical progression gradually ramping things up. And not that Bill Belichick did it illogically, but it feels like there's, a whole streamlined process where there's a process in place. They know the steps, and like they're sort of, working things in a way that makes sense, in an order that makes sense. And so it was I'm glad we saw them do the third down and red zone stuff in minicamp, because if they were still working on stuff that we saw in OTAs, like that would be a little bit of a concern to me. It's like, are these guys picking it up? There were maybe some signs that maybe they're moving a little fast, because we saw a couple of substitution issues on defense. There were a couple of plays on offense where Vrabel blew the whistle. Maybe they were slow coming out of the huddle.
I think that was mostly yesterday, right? That wasn't necessarily a long-term thing.
No, yeah. No, I'm just talking minicamp. Yeah, just the last 2 days. But like minicamp is when they started doing more of the red zone stuff and like the real, the real intense team drills. And so maybe procedurally there's some things they still need to work on, and maybe that maybe they sort of ramped up a little fast.
But that's what this time of year is for.
Yeah.
To work on that stuff.
Yeah. I'm not saying they're screwed.
No, I know. No, I'm saying like all right. You ramp it up to kind of, you test yourself, right?
Yeah.
You see, okay, can we do it at this speed? All right. This is the kind of stuff we got to iron out. So we know we have to iron out, but no, it does sort of feel different. I thought Keon White had an interesting quote yesterday talking to reporters. This is just from him. Quote, "Now I feel like I have a coach. I like Mike Vrabel. He leads with work. I can respect that. It's similar to Bill, just with a younger face. I think we all know how I feel about that. I liked him. So it's comforting to know that you have a hard ass at the helm who will not be afraid to fist fight with you in a back alley." And he got some more into I'm trying to find the rest of the quote there.
Well, the coach thing, like that to me is a direct shot at Jerome Mayo.
But he also got some more into the technique stuff too. So it's Mayo, but I think it's everything last year, right?
Yeah.
Where he's working with, they're more hands-on with the players, which was also very clear over the last month at these OTAs and minicamps, just how hands-on they are.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, we saw Vrabel right in the thick of things on the special teams drills. And like I just mentioned the pennies earlier, like he's right in there almost as like simulating himself as a player. Like, you can tell he's a former player. And it's like Jerome Mayo didn't really carry himself that way. That's why I think he's sort of making an indirect, sort of a vague shot at Mayo, because Mayo didn't really carry himself like a coach. He felt more like a CEO, a businessman type, where he's like, this isn't my coach. This is my, this is my supervisor, that sort of thing. So I think that's why Keon White maybe didn't really, he wasn't as receptive to the way Jerome Mayo ran things as Mike Vrabel is. And like, this just goes back to why I think Vrabel's a good hire. I think he's going to be good at the head coachy things, as I've described them. He's going to be good communicator. He's going to be hands-on. He's going to, be in on the details. He's going to have a whole process in place. He's going to have a vision. He's going to have the big picture and the little picture in terms of the little details. And like the guys feel like they're buying in, especially on defense.
Yeah, they really do. And I just want to get back to like the hands-on thing too, because I think that's going to make such a big difference, because it is a young team and there is development needed. Like, as much as we've kind of lauded the moves they've made in the offseason, even some of those more depth moves, a lot of people talk about Braden Swinson, right, as a steal. Well, that's a guy that still kind of needs to polish out his game. He has a lot of tools that you like in a rookie, and where he's at this point is good. But if he's at this point in 2 or 3 years, it's not, right? And player development's been a problem for them. So the hands-on approach is encouraging, just in terms of the player development aspect of it too. Not just the, getting the right shit, getting everything in order and make sure everybody's accountable and all that. That's part of it. There's also the actual coaching of the football. There's working through with a guy the pass rush reps that he's going to use. There's working through a route step by step with the receiver, that sort of thing. And we saw them doing that as well.
Yeah, and it feels like Vrabel sort of has an open door in that regard, right?
Yeah.
And I go back to...
Well, he's coaching up everybody. We talked about this. Like, any position, any level of the roster, any age, like, he's one-on-one with anybody who's near him.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think this was OTAs. This wasn't this week, but Javon Baker had that big catch. And he sort of showboated, ran down all the way down the field.
I think that was the last OTA practice.
He was slow to get back to the huddle. Vrabel had an issue with him, and he sort of chewed him out on the field. Vrabel isn't like he's not like a screamer the way he's communicating out on the field, but like he sort of reprimanded him in the way he could mid practice, and then after practice we saw him walking off with Baker one-on-one, going over things with him, like a little animated, but he did go to Baker and say, like, look. He had the one-on-one conversation, like, look, we need you to be better about that. We need you to be sharper. We need you to, be on your stuff and not worry about showboating after making a catch. Like, we need you to be focused here. And so it was good to see him just have that little one-on-one time. It's like, it's not like the door is closed on a guy that like doesn't feel like he has a chance to make the roster. It doesn't matter if you're the first guy on the roster, 90th guy on the roster. It feels like he's engaged with everybody out there.